Oh, welcome back, everybody, to another Chasing Tales episode. I am your host, Walt, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chase. We just got done last weekend hosting a Teach and Train event, and here we are talking to a fellow saddle hunter who absolutely slays them from the saddle in South Carolina.
Yes, we did, man. I had a blast at the Teach and Train event. It was good getting to meet all the aspiring saddle hunters out there, and I think a lot of them were converted this weekend. And it was good to get to hang out with some of our buddies, Adam Glass, Nick Chandler. We got to hang out with Craig Kroom, who is a patron of the show, man. So I mean, I got to hang out with you, man. So I had a great time this past weekend getting to do that.
Yeah, no, that was good, man. I really enjoyed it. It was a good time getting to meet with everybody. The highlight, obviously, was meeting Craig. The guy came on the podcast, in which you'll hear him next week. We kind of wanted to give everybody a break of the Florida content. We've gone pretty hard on that, but you'll hear from him next week. But the dude, he was kind of hesitant to come on the show, but he jumped on, and he just hit the ground running and dropped some, I think, absolute knowledge bombs. I can't wait to have everybody hear that dialogue.
Yeah, man, it was awesome having him on the podcast. It was great doing the podcast after the event. We kind of had a round table going on, so a bunch of fellow Florida hunters talking about Florida hunting, man. So I had a blast.
Yeah, it was a good time, man. Seeing everybody get excited about hunting, any form of hunting, is always so rewarding. But every time somebody would sit down in that saddle and you saw their apprehension just like dissipate completely, the sign for me, I don't know if you noticed this, was every time they would cross their arms and put it on the bridge, it was like, you just accepted your fate. Yep. Clayton Bahn on the podcast today, and the guy, I've talked with him off and on since probably last October. Just a high energy, high rolling guy. He kind of reminds me of Parker, kind of in the, maybe he's a little like legitimately addicted to the outdoors, addicted to whitetails.
Yeah. This was the first time, my first chance in being able to talk to him, but I could definitely tell throughout the podcast that he's just ate up with hunting and anything that has to do with hunting. So it was a real good podcast, and I learned a lot about South Carolina. This is not a state that we've highlighted, and there were some things that I wasn't aware of, and I really didn't ever put the pieces together on how much it kind of mimics Florida. So that was kind of cool.
It was kind of staggering, right? Like as the dialogue progressed, the seasons, the bag limits, the management, the habitat itself. I mean, granted they don't have the Everglades, but I mean that Savannah River bottom probably isn't too far from it.
Yeah. I mean, the size of the deer. I mean, just everything kind of about it just kind of made me envision Florida for the most part. So I think maybe someday I need to get up there and try to hunt South Carolina.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think naturally speaking, we probably shouldn't do that to Clayton because he works really hard to get on this deer. And if we just were to go up there and apply what we know, I mean, the poor guy wouldn't have any deer to hunt.
Yeah, maybe. It sounds like, though, that he mentioned that he loves to outwork everybody. So us just going up there for a few days don't stand a chance against somebody who's ate up with it in 365, pretty much South Carolina. So but he would be a good resource to have if we went up there for sure.
Yeah. Well, we're going to let everybody get to the show, but we got to thank a couple new patrons of the show that we've got. We've had a lot of growth in the Patreon group, and if you're listening to this episode and you'd like to support the podcast and you'd like a chance to win free gear every quarter, 4 times a year, we give away a bunch of gear, and this quarter we're giving away a set of 3 Timber Ninja carbon fiber C1 climbing sticks. These jokers are ridiculously light. They're safety rated, guys. They've taken the trouble to make sure that their stuff is quality, that your life isn't hanging in the balance, but at the same time, you're at least getting the best product you possibly can. It's incredibly innovative, and I hope you guys would be interested in contributing to the show so that we can continue to travel and upgrade our camera equipment. I mean, dude, Chase, you have got a freaking video camera now.
Yeah, I do have a video camera, man. I'm excited about being able to take it out in the woods and document the hunts that I'm going to be going on this year. It's kind of something that I'd always kind of thought about, but just never really took the plunge. So I've taken the plunge now, and I'm hoping that not only can I get it for content for us, but it's something that I'll always be able to have and go back and look at and maybe show the grandkids one day.
That's it, man. That's it. Well, we've got two new patrons to thank, and then we're going to let you guys get to the episode. Timothy Doherty and Joseph Wiggins, thank you so much for signing up. Hopefully we can just continue to bring you more awesome content.
Yep, that's what the goal of our Patreon account has always been. So why don't we get to Clayton?
Time to go. Clayton Bahn, dude, how you doing?
I am great, guys. How are y'all?
Hot, sweaty. We were kind of talking about that. It 'tis the season.
It very much is. I'm sticky at the moment. I'm sitting on my back porch drinking a nice cold beer, and yeah, it's still hot. Even the sun's down, and it's still hot.
That's going to be the theme for probably where you're at, probably the next 2 months, right?
Oh yeah, it stays hot here pretty much through the end of September.
Gotcha. Tell everybody where there is.
So I live in the upstate of South Carolina, just south of Greenville, South Carolina.
Right on. And that's your old stomping grounds, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I've been back here now for about 6 months, and this is the third time that I've lived in the upstate in about the last 12 years or so. I was in Knoxville, Tennessee the last 2 years, and then the upstate of South Carolina for 4 years before that. And then the 4 years before that, I got to live in Kentucky, and then was in college here in South Carolina the previous 4 years before the Army.
That's awesome, man.
Go Tigers.
Hey, at least you didn't say go Big O. We would have been fighting at that point in time. You hunt a state that is like intriguing to Chase and I. We were sitting there looking at our guest list, and one of the things Chase wanted to do was talk to somebody from South Carolina. And I think it's because you guys, Florida gets this rep of having like a really long and weird season, but you guys are not far behind us. When does your season kick off?
Yeah, so it depends where in the state you are. So where I live, again, kind of northwest corner of the state, referred to as the upstate. We've got a pretty traditional, pretty normal season here. Archery kicks in September 15th, and then a couple weeks later, muzzleloader kicks in, and then rifle up here comes in on October the 11th, and then basically runs through January 1st. And then there's an imaginary line about halfway south and east through the state where it's generally known as the region called the Midlands. At about the Midlands, that imaginary line kicks in and some game zones shift over. And basically from there down to the coast, it's like a completely different deer season. So the season there opens August the 15th and then runs through January the 1st. And kind of the weird thing for a lot of guys listening to this is that on August 15th, basically everything opens up. So rifle, shotgun, muzzleloader, bow, crossbow, blowgun, air gun, spear, whatever, right? It opens on August the 15th and again runs the entirety of the season. And South Carolina is a state that up until really like last year or the year before, you didn't tag your deer at all. You didn't check them in. I think the limit was like, I don't even know if there was a limit on bucks. As of 2 years ago, there's now a tag system in place, and you're allowed I think it's maybe $5 total.
Interesting.
Yeah. So again, in the lower part of the state, the seasons are a lot more liberal. And you're allowed to run dogs for deer, as well as still hunt and bait and do everything else you want. It's pretty much fair game, free reign all the time. And then up here where I live, I want to say it was about 4 or 5 years ago, baiting became legal up here as well.
Okay.
That's a very like Florida-esque story, isn't it, Chase?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It sounds like Florida for the most part, because we just went to tags in Florida last year, and it's $5. But before then, it was pretty much unlimited.
Yeah.
As well for the most. I mean, if you stayed in your zone, it was about $240 you could take in a season. But if you hunted the whole state of Florida, as long as it was, then what would it be, like 300 something, 400 something bucks that you could take in a season?
It's unreal. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 a day, every day for the whole season. So you do the math on that. But yeah, I mean, so it sounds like that in the little southern area that. Are there more deer in the southern area? Is that why it's more liberal down there from where you're at?
I'm not exactly sure. From my experiences, I would say so. Yes, there's a lot more agriculture down there, and there's basically the whole state. With the exception of some smaller regions, is the vast majority, of the timber is pines. And like a lot of other southern states, there's a lot of hardwood creek bottoms, but the large expanses of open timber, if there are any, are all kind of in the northwestern portion of the state where I live, and either further up towards the Smoky Mountains, or the Blue Ridge Mountains as they call them here, and then down in that lower part of the state is where you've got your traditional agriculture, a lot of corn, beans, cotton, peanuts getting grown, and that's where the deer are just unreasonably thick in terms of numbers.
Right. Well, what is a good buck in South Carolina? Like, what's considered, like, if somebody kills a buck and everybody kind of oohs and ahs over, then they're going to ride it on their basically tailgate for the whole day. What does one of those look like?
Man, I would say any time anybody's killed a deer that's 100 inches plus, anybody looks at it and says, "Hey, man, that's a real nice buck right there." There's I don't know what the state record is, but anytime you see a deer in that 120 plus region coming out of anywhere in the state, it definitely grabs people's attention. Every year you'll see a few guys, post pictures of, or a news article, or a South Carolina Game and Fish article of a deer that's 150 plus. Not very common. They do exist. There's a lot of high-end private plantation type hunt clubs down lower in the coastal area of the state, and kind of in that Midlands region, where there's these large acreage areas where the deer are really manicured, managed, and just grown well. And there's some really, really nice deer that come out of that area. I haven't hunted that area a whole lot. I've just kind of been in tune to it, but yeah, I mean, that kind of, it's a broad picture, but really anything in that 100 to 110 inch plus range, we'll get you a second look or two around here.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, it still sounds like Florida.
Yeah, it does in a lot of ways. I know that South Carolina, when I was coming up in college, I was doing a coastal ecology degree, and during that time we were doing a lot of studies on the coast there, Georgia, southeast Georgia, and one of the things we noticed was that South Carolina was doing some really interesting experimental studies where burning a lot of the pines and whatnot was producing a lot more 100-inch deer down there on the coast. I kind of feel like South Carolina suffers from too many people shooting too many deer, and not necessarily genetics and food, because it seems like it's got a really healthy genetic potential. You don't see a lot of 3 on one side, 4 on the other kind of things. It's a lot of 8s and 10s, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you there. So, the vast majority of the state is, your hunting opportunities lie on leases. There's a lot of timber company, paper company owned land that, these paper companies or timber companies will lease out, 500 to 1,000 acre tracts here and there, and that'll be a hunt club. And then, the next property over is, 600 acres owned by a different timber company, and it'll be leased out, and it'll be a hunt club.
Right.
Pretty much every gate you drive past is going to have a hunt club, sign of one or another on it, or it's a couple 100 acre tract that a couple guys lease together. I mean, that's generally the common the common theme, at least from what I've experienced where I live. And then, the further south you go, some of those tracts of land start to get bigger and bigger, and you run into a lot more of the high-end type stuff. And then kind of speckled throughout in large pockets, there's 3 or 4 of them throughout the state. In large pockets are these national forests. So we've got the Francis Marion National Forest down towards the coastal part of the state, the Sumter National Forest kind of in the middle part of the state, and then some other national forest that's up kind of like right on the edge of the Smoky Mountains. And I'm drawing a blank on what it's called. And then there's one other that's kind of down northwest of Augusta, kind of butts up right on the South Carolina-Georgia line. Another big chunk of national forest there. And in terms of public land, I mean, that's the majority of it, is national forest. There are WMAs here and there, but I would say the vast majority of the public available is going to be national forest.
Okay. Now, are those national forest lands, are they basically walk-on type deals, or do you have to draw permits or get quotas for them, or how do the management areas work in South Carolina?
Good question. So I'm pretty much only familiar with the one that I'm going to be hunting this year. I've, for the most part, hunted private in South Carolina the last 5 or 6 years, and then when I was in college, I hunted some WMAs up near Clemson. The WMAs that I hunted there were all archery only. It's actually a lot of land that's owned by Clemson University. All managed archery only type places, 4 on one side plus, and then they do a managed rifle hunt there, like 1 weekend a year or something like that. And then the national forests themselves, from my understanding, they're all walk-on. So open to any methods, any time of the season, as long as it's, under statewide regs. The national forests are open according to that.
So it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity. What's the quality of the habitat that you get to hunt as a public land prowler up there?
It honestly, unless you're on like a big like really, really nice plantation in the lower part of the state, it's not going to vary a whole lot from like the private leases. It's all not all, but I should say a lot of it is going to be rolling pine hills and then hardwood creek bottoms, mixed in with select cut timber and clear cuts, however long ago they cut the timber or clear cut it. What I'm really keyed in on now is a lot of like 5 to 8 year old clear cuts, and then all the transitions into the hardwood creek bottoms and older pines.
Yeah, that makes sense. I pulled up OnX. One of the things whenever I talk to somebody who is somewhere I'm not, overly familiar with, I pull up OnX and then I just put on public lands, and it's always remarkable to me to see how public land lights up on a map. And there's a lot of it, but I see what you're saying. It all is very national forest-esque. I'm not surprised to hear you say that you're going to be hunting clear cuts, because that's probably going to be your hard edges and heavy brows, because it doesn't look like there's going to be any kind of ag that bumps up against a national forest or anything.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, where I'm keyed in at right now, it's kind of smack dab in the middle of the state, and there's, I've probably driven hundreds of miles in the last couple months, exploring that area, and I think I have yet to see a cornfield or a bean field or anything like that down there.
Huh. Interesting. So is the area of South Carolina that you're at, is it very like North Georgia-esque?
I'd say it's pretty similar. Yeah. There's maybe less open, less open pasture type land, and more just straight up pine forest.
Gotcha. Okay. So you once told me that you're a terrible deer hunter. You just work harder than anybody you know. There's some variant of that. But basically, you said you weren't a very good deer hunter. You just work really hard. How does that work, given what the environment you're in? Because it sounds like maybe getting away from people and finding hidden pockets is your key, or what's that strategy look like for you in South Carolina?
Man, well, I'll recant that statement. I'm a terrible turkey hunter.
Oh, turkey! That's what it was. That's what it was.
I try really hard, and I get lucky every once in a while. And I'm a decent deer hunter, but I work really hard. I work really hard at that. I work harder at deer hunting than I do anything else. But you hit it on the head. I think just stubborn will, and then also just learning from past experiences has been kind of the biggest key to my success there, whether I'm hunting here or in Western Kentucky, other places. And I think Walt, I shared some trail camera pictures with you the other day of some really nice deer and honestly, this is again the last 2 months since I've been back here. This time has been my first foray into public land here in South Carolina. But honestly, and I know this has been hit on before, but some of the deer clubs are pressured harder, if not as hard, as the public land is. So, one of the deer that I'm the most proud of, I killed in South Carolina probably 4 years ago on a club. And man, there was more hunting pressure on and more human sign on that club property than anything I've seen yet on the national forest. And killing, and I bring that up because killing that deer, I shot that deer about 75 yards or so from a very busy 2-lane highway. I was watching log trucks and people coming home from work on that October afternoon, and couldn't hear a thing because of the freaking 18-wheelers carrying pine trees driving by, and ended up shooting a darn near 200-inch. I'm sorry, 200-inch. I wish 200 pound. Yeah, like 115-inch or so 7-pointer. Just a giant old, probably 5.5, if not older, South Carolina buck that had been running around for, dodging bullets for who knows how long. And I think part of the reason I shot that deer was because I was in a spot that nobody else was going. And, it's been hit on a lot before, but you don't always have to outwalk everybody. You just got to be where the other people aren't, where the deer feel comfortable. And, back to the pictures that we were talking about a minute ago, Walt, some of the best pictures and some of the best deer that I'm on right now are, not 50 yards from a gravel road that I'm sure if I hunt that spot on opening day, I'm going to see 20 trucks drive up and down. Literally watch them, I'll be 60 yards off the road.
So there's a couple different directions I want to go with this, but the buck you found, what went into, what would you do to replicate finding that buck that you sent me on trail camera? By the way, is that Onyx Waypoint? Is that where I can find them?
Right there. Yeah, that's just to give you an idea, like the general chunk of the national forest.
Gotcha.
that I'm kind of keyed in on now, and it's going to look just like all the other stuff will. Rolling hills, hardwood creek bottoms, flood cut timber, and wide expanses of clear cut here and there.
I got you. So you're trying to find that deer again. What did you notice about finding that deer that you would apply elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically I've done a lot of listening to the podcast with Josh Profit amongst others, on kind of his trail camera strategy of cast a wide net over a large area and, put a lot of cameras out, check them. You find something that's good, you key in, you hone in on it, and you try to figure that deer out into some sort of pattern to where you can key in and kill him. So really kind of how I start pinpointing and how I found that buck is start with the map, find the latest aerials that I can, and look for the edges that I know that the deer like, especially in this part of the country. I'm pretty much when I'm scouting here, I'm glued to edges, whether it be mature pines transitioning into the hardwood creek bottom, or what's typically the best for me is if I can find 3 or 4 edges that come together and you've got significant diversity of edge, right? So it could be open hardwoods, and then what gets me the most excited is if I can find a narrow strip of hardwoods that sticks out into a clear cut, that connects with a bigger chunk of hardwoods that connects to mature pines, right? If you can find that kind of that star, if you will, of diversity, that's where I start. And typically what I'm looking for, and this is kind of a strategy that I've adapted here just since I've moved back here this year, is, find that diversity. And then what I've been really keying in on is the rut sign from last year, right? What's going to indicate that there's been a buck that's just been glued to this area, right? So in the case of that deer that I sent you the picture of, I went into that spot. I saw that star, if you will, or all these different habitats kind of just merging in one spot. In this case, it was 50 yards from a gravel road. And I'm like, all right, well, that's probably so close to the road that everybody's going to drive past that. And there's, what I've gathered talking to other guys that hunt the same area, the majority of the guys that hunt it, they don't necessarily climb or put out stands. They're walking around with rifles, just sitting on the ground, stalking, if you will, right? So at least in my pea brain, what I see that as is, all right, when I'm the average hunter out there, I'm going to look at Onyx or whatever map that I've got, and I'm going to find the biggest chunk of land that I can. And I say, all right, I'm going to go walk around that, because I can walk around that thing all day. I'm not going to pick the little, 20, 30 acre chunks of land. I'm going to find, something where I can go hunt all day, and I can get way back there. And don't get me wrong, I do a lot of that. I do a lot of that as well. But, in this particular instance, everything I was looking for was 50 yards off the road. Like, well, hell, need to go check that out. So I walked in there and, of course, right on one of those edges, from maybe that particular clear cut's probably 4 or 5 years old, right on the edge of the hardwoods, there's maybe a 10-yard strip of about waist tall grass that's just got some little scrub oaks and stuff like that growing in it. And then it transitioned into mature hardwood. And I mean, literally every 3-inch tree for 100 yards that I walked along that edge was just torn up last year. I was like, all right, well, there's definitely a lot of bucks, working through here. And there was a lot of sign of browse in there at the time as well. Recent browse, I should say. And like, all right, this looks good. So I set up a camera there, let it soak for 2 weeks. And literally, I mean, just about every day in daylight, there's a bachelor group coming through there. There were actually 2 different bachelor groups coming through there, just working that same edge, just feeding along. And it was very evident that they were bedded just inside of the clear cut and then coming out. And it was, and I say this because of the time when they were all there. So I'm talking daylight activity between 8:30 and 11 in the morning, almost every day for that 2-week period. If you were to drive a truck there and park and look at basically where my camera was, you could, if you really, really look, you could see my camera strap on the tree from your truck on the gravel road.
So you don't care so much about getting away so much as you're looking for a certain set of variables, and when you find it, you're willing to put time into that spot.
In this particular case, yes.
Gotcha.
I mean, it varies, right? So, I pulled that camera card after I'd walked probably 1.5 miles in, crossed the creek, and was on the thickest, nastiest, probably piece of this national forest known to man. And, I got a picture of a great buck there too. But, one's 50 yards from the road, the other one's, a mile plus, right?
Right.
It just varies, right? So I'm looking for, right, what isn't, where is that deer going to be comfortable? And what the jury's still out on is, all right, when the Orange Army hits the woods, or in South Carolina, I don't think you have to wear orange. So when the Camo Army hits the woods, where are those deer going to feel comfortable at? So in the case of my spot by the road, I think they're going to be comfortable there because everybody's going to drive past it. And then in the case of the spot where I was, mile plus in and some really, really thick, nasty stuff, I think they're going to be comfortable there too.
Right. Now, how much history do you have with this place?
I stepped boots on the ground there for the first time probably the last weekend in May.
Last weekend in May. And do you know anyone that's hunted that area before? Did you ever talk to anybody beforehand that's hunted there?
Everybody that I talked to that I talked to that's hunted that area was like, yeah, it gets hit real hard. There's a lot of guys that hunt it. There's trucks everywhere in there, and I've got some buddies that hunted it for the first time last year, and their opinion was pretty much the same of, hey, once rifle season kicked in on October 11th, the amount of activity just drastically increased. A lot of guys just parking at gates and then walking logging roads as far as they could, turning around.
Okay. So going into this season, like you said, you've seen the deer on trail cams and you've found the sign that says that they're there. When would they be laying down that sign in South Carolina? Is there like a defined rut or anything in South Carolina?
It's going to vary a little bit by the part of the state that you're in. I wouldn't say it's necessarily as radically different as maybe what you guys see in Florida or, what they see in Alabama or Mississippi in terms of like being really late or really early. I would venture from my experience, hunting private and then talking to a lot of guys is, they're going to rut in pockets, and obviously the daylight activity is completely controlled by the weather. But as a rule of thumb, at least in the area that I'm hunting, I want to be in the woods somewhere, about the second week of October is when that activity is just going to skyrocket. And then I actually read a study. I think the majority of the does in that part of the state are starting to get bred like right around the third week or fourth week in October, like right around the end of October is the peak time. But That being said, I've seen sporadic, crazy rut activity the last week of December as well. So I mean, from my experience, I would say like, the third week of October is clutch, and then somewhere around like mid-December, it kind of fires back up.
Okay, so maybe a little secondary rut action going on.
Yeah,
in that area.
I've talked to a lot of guys that have said, based on area, right, and different genetic doe groups, the rut can be predicted by when those specific does come into estrus versus the others.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that same thing before. So what I was kind of getting at is, do you think that is there a lot of bow hunting pressure on that property, or is it just they kind of all fall in there when it's gun season?
Yeah, and I know just from talking to some like-minded individuals that I've connected with, either through like the Saddle Hunter forum or the Run and Gun page or whatever, just connecting with various guys that have hunted this property, that generally speaking, it doesn't see a whole lot of pressure until rifle kicks in, and then things really escalate.
Okay, so is one of your goals maybe to get in there? I'm assuming you're going to try to get in there early as you possibly can, and try to, because you said you have 5 buck tags in the state of South Carolina now since they've went to buck tags. So
yeah,
are you going to try to get in there early?
Yeah, you can get up to 5. So I think you get 2 to start with, and then you can buy additional ones, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah,
okay.
Generally, my plan is going to be hit it extremely hard the first week of the season.
Right.
Just absolutely get after it. I mean, probably like try and hunt like every other evening or every day or every afternoon for like the first 5 days of the season, just without burning up too much vacation time. Be able to get in the tree a lot, play the system a little bit, but. And you hit it on the head. My goal is to have one down by the time rifle comes in, and also too, that's kind of when my out of state endeavors start picking up as well. So, if I could kill one of these deer that I will hopefully have targeted or something close to that, within the first 2 weeks of the season, I would say I'd be really on track.
How do you think those deer are going to adapt to the pressure in that area? Because in Florida, I've seen in some areas, I think it largely depends on, actually, Chase, we talked about this in the last podcast, is a lot of times it seems like the amount of human pressure they see throughout the year dictates how they respond to that initial surge of people into the woods. What do you think is going to occur in those spots right after bow season hits?
I honestly, everything's still so thick during the first really like month of our season here, especially in the upstate and in the lower part of the state, probably the first 2.5, if not 3 months of the season. But anyway, on the public land where I'm at, everything is so thick and you're just limited to bow hunters. Like, I don't see it changing a whole lot the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the season until muzzleloader kicks in. Just because it's still so thick.
Sure.
And other than smelling somebody, a deer, I don't think a deer is going to really feel it as much. Then what my gut tells me is as soon as rifle kicks in and you've got Tinks bombs going off every 100 yards apart within a quarter mile of every gate and parking lot, like those deer are going to go nocturnal really quick, and they're going to go thick really quick. Is me looking into a crystal ball, and then from a lot of past experience hunting on a 1,000-acre club with 12 other guys, as soon as all that gravel starts popping at 30 minutes before daylight and 30 minutes after sunset, those deer go, especially the mature ones, they just go dark very, very quick. I hunted in a club where there was, baiting allowed and guys were riding a dirt track around the place in their 4-wheelers, checking cameras and putting out corn. And, sure, we'd get pictures of good deer on corn piles, but I mean, with very rare exception, they were all at night.
Right. Yeah, that seems to be about right for for most clubs and things like that.
Is Florida a baiting state?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not on public land.
Right. And then South Carolina is the same way. So you can't bait or do any of that on the national forest. But the again, a lot of the properties that butt up to this national forest are these large hunt clubs where I've seen them, just from being on the property line. There's a lot of feeders adjacent to the property out there. Where guys are riding their 4-wheelers around, checking cameras, putting out corn, and they're without a doubt going to see a lot of little bucks and does. But the type of deer that I'm chasing, they're it's few and far between unless they just happen to be there on the right day when the right doe walks out on their 400-yard long shooting lane.
Right.
Those mature deer are not falling for that the majority of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Well, it sounds like you should set up along those borders.
Yeah. So I mean, full transparency, the deer that I sent you the picture of, I mean, on that edge that I'm talking about, it butts up to a hunt club, and about 200 yards away from where my camera is, there's a super long strip that you can see on Onyx. You can see a feeder and a box blind. Like it's a hunt club that butts right up to it, and I guarantee you, I'm gonna, if I hunt in there enough, I'm gonna catch a buck slipping out of that thick clear cut when he hears that 4-wheeler pull in, or he hears that gravel popping, or he hears the guy pull the 4-wheeler up 40 yards away from his box blind.
Yeah, no doubt, man.
That wouldn't happen.
That'll be a money strategy.
Yeah.
I think that'll really pay off for you, for sure.
So I mean, one of the things that I've been keying in on as well is, all right, looking at these, and again, I mean, if you zoom in on Onyx, you'll see what I'm talking about. I mean, all the properties surrounding that national forest property, you can look at them and be like, yep, that's a hunt club. So you'll see all these little loading decks that people have bulldozed into food plots.
Yeah.
You can see shooting lanes cut in and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's like a lot of the other southern states, hunting is a way of life here. Everybody does it, and especially guys that climb into that aren't as diehard as we are and crazy as we are. The guys that say they're deer hunters, and they are deer hunters, but they get in they go out twice a year and sit in a box blind and shoot deer. I mean, that's what people do here. I mean, that's it's everywhere, and that's, I mean, nothing against them. I mean, I used to be that way when I started, but I'm using that to my advantage. So I'm looking at these maps and I'm saying, all right, how are these other hunters going to act? And knowing, having 15 years of banging my head against the wall trying to kill a big buck, what would I do if I was a big buck? And, using what I know, it's going to be, all right, where's he going to go to be safe to avoid the people that are coming in trying to kill him? And that's where I want to be.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's something that I'm going to kind of implement because, 2 years ago it was try and figure out, where are the deer. Last year I figured out where the deer were, and then it was a lot of holy crap, things change once people hit the woods. And I did some, long season soaks, and what I found were some of the nasty, gnarly places, there might only be one spot to hang a stand. Maybe they're not ideal for people to go to. That kind of, as a season progresses, I think that's where I'm going to kind of start making my way, because the moment people started showing up on the landscaping in an unusual fashion and in a dependable fashion for me, right? Because most guys don't want to go far off the road, like you said. So, to get to where I went, it was a fair amount of effort. It wasn't very far, but you had to wade through stuff that was a little waist high, and you can't see where you're putting your feet. So are you stepping on snakes? You weed out a third of the guys. Just putting those little barriers in place and allowing those people to funnel pressure. That's something that has been a common theme with a lot of the guests that have come on. They've volunteered that. I haven't had to really provoke it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that can be really powerful and kind of I would say it just in the last 2 to 4 years that has really kind of taken my game to the next level is just having an ultimate level of flexibility and going to where the deer are, right? So, for a while when I was hunting private land in South Carolina, it was, all right, I'm going to go out and hang a bunch of lock-on stands and have a bunch of options. All at the same time, I still had my Summit Viper climber, and, I had that thing stealth stripped to the max and filled with foam, and I had a real comfortable net seat on it, and I had my, third hand archery bow holder, mounted to the left side of that Summit Viper's rail. And like that thing was great. I moved around in it a ton, but I was limited to these straight trees with no limbs. But I killed a lot of deer out of that thing, and I'm not knocking it at all. I mean, it's a deadly tool, and I again shot a lot of nice deer out of it. But I think switching over to the saddle game about 2.5, 3 years ago has just given me the added layer of, I can hunt wherever I want to hunt. I can get in whatever I want to get in and put myself in a position to be in the spot where I'm going to kill the deer.
Yeah. And you're going to let the deer pressure itself kind of put you, you're going to let the season itself kind of dictate where you go instead of trying to make those decisions prior, right?
Exactly. I'm not going to be limited to a tree that I know, I've prepped and, I cut the 2 limbs off of it that needed to go so I could get 30 feet up in my climber. Like, I'm okay being 12 feet up now if I'm in the right tree. And I mean, a great example of that is the buck I shot, and this was in Western Kentucky, but I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. It was a spot I'd walked past the previous few years with my Summit Viper on my back, and I was like, man, I'd love to hunt here, but there's not a single tree I can get in. And the first year I was saddle hunting, I climbed a tree right in the ridgetop funnel where I needed to be. I was only about 10 feet off the ground, and ended up shooting this really nice 8-pointer at eye level. Strong side saddle shot. He never knew I was there because I'm in between a bunch of cedar limbs. And that just solidified it for me. I was like, there's no way I would have been in this particular spot and gotten the shot on this buck had I not been in this specific tree. And the only way that I was doing that was either in a tiny, tiny, tiny lock on or a saddle.
Right.
That story is becoming quite a frequent thing here. Chase had a similar situation where last year he was able to get into a tree that he normally couldn't get into, and it paid some dividends for him.
Yeah, and I would say the other part of my game that I'm just, I don't know if I'll ever change, but in my eyes, I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a spot and said, man, I need to sit there on the ground and it's going to be a money spot, but I just can't bring myself to do it. I want to be in a tree. And you hear all these old timers and young guys too that are like, hey, if that's where it tells me I need to be, I've got no problem sitting on the ground and getting it done. I mean, you hear it time and time again. You think, I mean, just the first one that comes to my mind is Ted's buck on the hunting public that he shot in Missouri last year, just sitting on his butt next to a tree, and it's like, I would love. I see spots like that all the time where I'm like, I need to do that, but I just want to be in a tree because I feel like I can see so much more and just I'm so much more aware.
Right. There's some areas down here that I've already told myself this season that I'm going to hunt on the ground. And it's the reason for it is just this really short pine trees, thick, but there are openings in those pine trees, and it's just loaded with deer. And there's no way, there's not a tree within, I don't know, 500 yards to be able to get in to hunt that area. But I feel like I'm really losing a lot of the area that I could be hunting if I would just go ahead and say, all right, you're just going to have to sit on the ground. You're just going to have to sit on the ground and make it happen. And I think that will probably end up paying at least some dividends this year on some deer, because we killed a deer out of there last season, kind of at the end of the year. I was rifle hunting at that point. It was out of a ground blind. But I think I was like, well, why am I just going to limit myself to that? Why don't I get in here during bow season? Because the deer were in there then too. And I think that I'm going to have to end up doing that, is kind of getting a little bit out of the comfort zone and just make that decision. All right, you're just going to hunt from the ground. And it's kind of hard sometimes in Florida because you're thinking it's like, well, it's 90-something degrees outside. Your scent's going to be everywhere. But I feel like, okay, well, if I get a good wind or a good constant wind or something like that, then I just need to go in there and at least give it a try and see if I can make it happen.
Well, I think that's the key right there is, having the mindset of like, all right, I'm willing to try something different that could end or result in total failure, but could also get the job done. I think that's what makes a lot of successful hunters very successful, is that they're willing to adapt and they 100% learn from what they've seen in the woods to get it done the next time. I think one of the things that has changed for me over the last few years is just, having the ability and making the decision to try some off the wall stuff, right? Whether it's, hang a camera 50 yards from the road, or I carried a Montana decoy last year, one of those like 2D fold out doe decoys, and so I carried one of those with me when I was hunting in Kentucky, because in previous years, anytime I've seen a buck cruising a ridge line over, he's out of bow range, and I grunt at him or I make any sort of like noise at him or whatever, they just stop, they freeze, and they look, and they're waiting to see another deer, or they're waiting to see movement. I was like, all right, well, this has happened to me 3 years in a row now. Like, calling's just pretty much ineffective because the woods are so open, the deer just stop and look. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to give this 2D, Montana decoy a shot. And I hunted over it last year, and I can't tell you how many, all my buddies that I was out there hunting with were looking at me like, you're an idiot. Like, why are you, hunting over a decoy on, this pretty highly pressured public land? Like, you're just going to scare all the deer off. Well, I actually didn't. I had, none of the deer were ones I wanted to shoot, but I had a couple like 3.5-year-old, one really nice 8-pointer, and then probably a 2.5-year-old 10-pointer all come in within like 10 yards of the decoy, stop, and just stare at it. And here I am hanging in a saddle 15 yards away, and you could have easily sent an arrow at them, but instead, they had never had any idea I was there because they were so transfixed on that decoy and my calling at them, that when they stopped, they saw that thing and they came in.
Nice.
So I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that on, highly pressured southern deer as well. I mean, why not? I'm going to try it until it, causes me to shoot myself in the foot. Until I have a bad experience, I'm going to keep trying it. And I'd actually, you guys know Ted Brighton?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I told Ted all about the decoy thing, and right before his rut hunt in Missouri, he went and picked one up and had literally the exact same thing happen on the buck that he shot in Missouri last year. Called it the deer. It was in some thick stuff. the deer basically did a semicircle around him until it saw the decoy and came in just like transfixed on the decoy and gave Ted the opportunity to smash him with an arrow at like 20 yards.
Nice. Yeah, he's been on the podcast, right, Walt?
Yeah.
No,
he's
been
been
way back when.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got the opportunity to go out and run around some Missouri public land with him last December. Had a blast. That guy's fun to try and keep up with. 5 or 6 mile bike rides at 3 a.m.
Okay, I think I saw one of those videos. Did he post the videos? I think I might have seen that actually.
So you talk to him again, ask him about we were riding out. This was in December. We were riding out in the middle of an ice. There was a bunch of ice on the ground, and we both managed to wreck our bikes. And he went down first, and then I laid mine down to keep from running him over.
Oh man! So tell us about your saddle setup, dude. What are you running?
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to have a Phantom since last season, and so I'm rocking the Phantom, and I was in a Manus before that, and then I use a Predator platform, and I've got a homegrown platform that I've been messing around with as well. So I'm a minimalist guy. I'm not a minimalist guy in the pure sense of it, but when it comes to my saddle, I don't like a lot of like pouches and gear and stuff like that on my saddle. When I'm in the tree, I kind of like it to be bare. So what I've kind of experimented around with is leaving all of my and I'm one of the weird guys that I don't like to wear my saddle into the tree. I like to pack it in. So I've got an X2 Eberly stock X2 backpack. Shout out to Parker McDonald for turning me on to that thing.
We'll never shout him out.
Yeah. Great pack. I love that thing. I dabbled in the self-filming last year for the first time, and I got a lot of really cool footage. I'll send you some of it. Maybe you can post it with a link to this, but I got cool footage of both those deer those bucks that I was talking about that came into my decoy last year, and having that X2 pack just gives me the ability to bring everything I need into the woods with me. But saddle itself, I don't like anything on it. I own probably every climbing method known to man. I've got wild edge steps. I've got modified hawk steps. I bought the API hunting sticks and converted them to beef sticks. I've since cut all those in half and made my own little freakish platform / one stick climbing device that I'm getting pretty sold on this one stick method where I basically walk in with
not
30
you
feet
too.
of, 30 feet of the 8mm rope. I tried it the last weekend of the season last year, and it's so easy, and you're carrying in one stick. So,
right.
I mean, it's like I carry in one stick, then my Predator, and then this next evolution of my one stick that I've got now, I've got a 2-step Amsteel 8er on it, and then I've got basically it's a maybe 12 inch, like kind of looks like a beast stick, with 2 standoffs, 2 steps, 2 double-sided steps, and then on the top, there's actually 2 double-sided steps that are spaced out with stainless steel spacers to where the overall platform itself is, let's call it 8 inches wide by about let's call it 4.5 inches deep. If that makes sense. I'll send you a picture of it. But it holds a lot of promise, especially for a lot of those like quick hunts. I still don't think there's going to be anything for the long sits, in the meat of the season. I like my Predator a lot.
Oh, dude, I love my Predator. I've got absolutely no complaints when it comes to that thing, man. We just did the recent teaching train here in town, and everybody's like, should I get the XL? Should I get the XL? I'm like, there's nothing wrong with buying a tethered product. I just can't get past it is like the perfect size for me. That original OG Predator is just money.
Yeah, and I've probably got one of the first I would say probably one of the first 50 Gen 1 Predators, and I'm not an overly big guy or anything like that. And I'm never going to get rid of that thing. I like the idea of potentially having a larger size platform for later season hunts. I'm a big wiener. I don't like my feet getting cold, so I always rock the Arctic Shield boot insulators once it gets to about 25 degrees or so. So I could see having a bigger platform being really beneficial with, when I'm wearing the boot blankets.
Yeah, I could see that. I see what you're saying because they'd be a little more bulky, but a little difficult. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Or like the big pack boots up north. I bet you those would be wonderful to have.
Yeah, for sure.
Some extra comfort too.
Absolutely.
So where are you going out of state this year?
I'm gonna do one more round in Western Kentucky. This will be like the 6th year in a row that I've gone there. Had a lot of really good success. I haven't quite connected with the giant buck that I want to out there. So I'm gonna give it one more go. Had plenty of encounters, launched plenty of arrows, no avail. But we've had my group. I've got a group of guys that I've been going with for a while, and we've put collectively as a group killed some really nice deer, like right around like 145, 150 type deer, and had encounters with bigger ones than that, and can't really complain a whole lot about it. So gonna give that one more go, and then I'm gonna branch off and get further west next year, whether it be Illinois or Missouri or even further west like Oklahoma. Really just wherever I can find some public land that looks good, and just take off and see where the truck takes me.
Well, I can tell you this much, man. I'm scrolling through on X right now, really seriously considering South Carolina, man. It's pretty habitat, man.
It is. If you like thick and pines, it's a good place to go.
Well, I mean, it sounds like Florida, so
yeah.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because we didn't really talk about that a lot. So we talk about Florida. We talk several things about Florida, and a couple of things we talk about is it seems like deer are in pockets for sure.
Yep.
And I think we're kind of piecing that together on why they're in those pockets. But what in South Carolina, what is the pattern there for the deer? Because in Florida, it seems like the pattern's all over the place. And it can be because there's so many places they can bed, so much stuff they can feed on. So is that the same in South Carolina, or is it a little bit different?
I would say very, very similar here. I was talking about it being hot. This was probably 3 weeks ago. I was I had like a wake up moment, if you will. I rode into the national forest, parked my truck on top of a hill where there was a clear cut, or no, it was actually where they had thinned some like 5 to 8 year old pines, pretty recently, and parked the truck, and I was walking in the hardwoods right on the edge of those thin pines, and cut up into the thin pines because I saw a deer trail going into them. And as soon as I cut out of the hardwoods into the thin pines, like it was a noticeable change. Like it went from being, let's call it 78 degrees to being 88 degrees at 7:30 in the morning, right? I mean, just a noticeable, like from the creek bottom to the pines, it's like all of a sudden it was that much hotter in the sun. All those trimmed off pines. I'm sure you guys know the feeling that I'm talking about.
Yep.
Like you step into that, you smell the drying pine needles, and all of a sudden it's like, holy crap, it's a lot hotter right here than it was 10 yards behind me. So that was one of the things I was thinking. It's like, all right, the deer are definitely going to be using these clear cuts and the pines right now, for the new growth and the browse, but are they really bedding in these right now, especially in the summer? Like it's that much hotter. Like where are these deer realistically going to be? Like they want to be comfortable too, to a degree. So I was like, all right, that makes sense. So then I started thinking like, all right, if they're not bedding on the tops of these ridges right now, like where are they going to be? So on that scouting trip, I hung a few cameras down in creek bottom, basically on the thick the edges that I could find within the creek bottom. So it was like, where does it go from wide open hardwoods to, thick swampy type stuff? Or where does it go? Where is there a corner between let's say, a ridge of mature pines that butts up to a clear cut on another ridge, and then I got thick swamp and a strip of hardwoods that runs kind of right through the middle of everything in the creek bottom. And so I started hanging cameras in those areas, and I think what I'm finding and what I'm learning is, you know, the deer aren't necessarily in the thickest stuff right now because it's so much hotter. And so I'm finding them on, you know, again, creatures of the edge. I think they're bedding right on the edge where they're still getting the coolness of the hardwood creek bottom, but they have the ability to escape into the thick nasty if they need to.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, are you able to, like I was talking, are you able to like distinguish bedding or anything up there, or like food sources? What are they keying in on up there? Maybe early season acorns?
Yeah, so I think you know, in terms of the bedding stuff, I remember when I discovered the hunting beast probably 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. I was still living in South Carolina, and I read about it, and I was like, hell yeah, I'm gonna go out there, I'm gonna find some buck beds. And I don't think I found a single one. So to answer your question there, you know, I run into the same thing that you guys do. The deer can bed anywhere they damn well please.
Yeah.
And feel safe. You know, I think what they're looking for now, and what I'm, at least in my mind, if I was a big mature buck, I want to bed somewhere where I'm comfortable and where I'm safe. So it's the places of seclusion where they can get on the edge, you know, and have that escape cover, you know, very close, but still be comfortable. So where I'm getting my best pictures at now is on these edges where the deer are browsing, whether it's, you know, the growth that occurs right between hardwood creek bottom and pines. There's a lot of grasses and like low foliage that occur right there that the deer are browsing on. But then I've also got a lot of videos of them digging up acorns. So if I can find some good looking white oaks that you know, fit that edge criteria, I'm getting a lot of really good pictures under those white oaks right now where the deer are actually digging up acorns from last year.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't had much luck targeting hard mass here, but I also have had like several years of absolute garbage hard mass seasons too.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of other things that they can eat as well. So I mean, pretty much anything is a food source right now with all the low growth, which is with as wet of a spring and summer as we've had so far. It's been a little bit drier here the last month or so, but up to that, it was extremely wet. So there's a lot of green out there. And then, you know, early season food sources, I'm certainly not, you know, ignoring the persimmon trees that I walk up on that I can tell have fruit on them. And then oh man, what are the trees called that have the long black seed pods on them?
Oh,
honey locust.
Yep, honey locust. There you go.
Yeah, I ran up on one of those where there were shells all over the ground the last time I was out walking. You could tell that the deer had been in there. Maybe not recently, there weren't any left, but this past season they were in there just chewing those things all to heck.
I'm curious to see how it goes because this will be your first real full season back, right?
Yeah, and this is the first season that since I was in college. This will be the first season in South Carolina hunting strictly public. When I hunted in college, it was, you know, I hunted out of John boat then. So I John boat in, have my climber on my back, hop in, walk somewhere that looked good and climb a tree. And I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the wind or the food sources or the beddings. It was just, hey, you know, this looks like a good spot that a deer would walk through. And, you know, it didn't work out that great, you know, and you learn from that and you move on. And now I'm back to you know, I've had a lot of conversations with my hunting buddy that, you know, and we hunted together back in college as well. And I was like, man, if we could hunt, you know, that land that we were hunting back then and use what we know now, like, man, how different would things be? How different would things have turned out?
If only there were podcasts back then.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you couldn't find any buck bedding because I think everybody who's ever listened to that has always gone out with a renewed vigor to go out there and find it. But I really don't think the more we talk to people in the South who are successful on a routine basis, They're hunting those multiple transition areas that naturally funnel deer. There's very little you can actually do, I think, to get on top of a deer besides just get a bunch of eyes in the woods and identify areas where that property tends to hold deer. And then once you find that pattern, hunt that pattern.
Yeah, and I think that you hit it on the head, and that maybe the success, at least the equation that I'm looking to validate this year is, marry the hottest, freshest sign with historic sign in overlooked spots.
Right.
Marry those together equals daylight activity with mature deer, I hope.
Right. Yeah, I could totally see that happening. You and I have similar plans. I think you're way ahead of me in identifying what those patterns are. I'm behind you in that, but it'll be interesting to see postseason. I think you need to jump back on the podcast and we need to compare and contrast how our strategies played out.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, and I think you and I have talked about this. So one of the interesting things that I'm employing this year is over the last year I've gone a little bit ham in buying trail cameras.
Mm-hmm. How many do you have right now?
I don't want to say.
Oh, come on.
I don't want to say.
Mainly I won't say because I don't know, but I would say somewhere in the realm of 20 to 30.
Right on.
Okay. Not the most we've heard.
Yep.
No. And I think I'm up to 6 or 7 cell cameras at this point that I've accumulated. So it's going to be interesting to kind of balance out. I think what my plan is when I head to Kentucky in the early October to scout and hang some cameras, I'm just going to take all my cell phone cameras and do that, and then leave the balance of my just normal cameras on the public land down here, and Walt kind of do like what you did last year and just let them soak. Like maybe if I check them mid-season when I hunt or whatever, great. But just let them soak through the end of January. And what do I learn, right? Like what specific terrain features are the deer using during the most highly pressured time? What terrain features or what sticks out about the spots where I see the majority of the decent buck movement in daylight. I mean that's the name of the game, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's something I learned from Chase. So for the past couple of years, he's been hunting, more and more big deer, and he's started to identify more and more patterns to those deer. And one of the things I always noticed that was interesting about him is he would run that trail camera in the same spot for the longest period of time, and then one day he's like, okay, I figured it out. About December 8th every year, that's when this buck starts showing up on this camera. Well, if you don't leave that trail camera there long term, then you don't get that glimpse and you don't start to put that piece of the puzzle together. And, if I don't do that long soak on a WMA I almost named just then, I would have to edit out. You don't know that those deer get pushed into that swamp bottom because, you may have run it all summer. You probably wouldn't have gotten anything on that camera. But the moment the hunter impact gets there, it starts changing things. And that's kind of my goal, dude. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm aspiring to get on your level with the number of cameras, and I just want to start mapping these properties and start to find the pattern that's here. I think every property has a pattern, and it's just on you to get in there and figure it out.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so for me, the thing is, and I know you guys are the same way, like, there's not 180s hiding behind every tree and every thicket, and that's for the way that it is in the vast majority of places. And the whole concept of, chasing Hog Johnson is what drives me to the woods now. And I take that phrase from a movie called Eastern Rises. It's a fly fishing movie about these guys that adventure into the Kamchatkan Peninsula and just catch these like monster rainbow trout that are just like crazy aggressive. Go watch it if you like trout fishing at all.
I do.
Yeah. It's called Eastern Rises. When I was in Afghanistan, me and a couple guys would just talk about deer hunting and fly fishing, and we watched that movie probably like 10 times. But anyway, they talk about They talk about the concept of catching Hog Johnson, and it could be a small golden trout in the high Sierras, or it could be these massive rainbows in these Kamchatkan rivers. But it's just like going after the biggest fish in the water, or in our case, the biggest, nastiest, stinkiest Uncle Long Dick running around the woods. There's just something. It's a breed. We're a breed that is interesting and crazy all at the same time. We talk about sharing stories and talking tactics with guys that hunt similar terrain to what you do, and I've already just via different social media platforms ran into 3 or 4 guys that are hunting the same places that I hunt here and using similar tactics, and it's cool seeing guys that are doing what you're doing, having success. Killing Hog Johnson.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, maybe I can join the ranks of those.
Me too. I'm still trying to get there. I've killed a couple decent deer in South Carolina, and the fun part is when you start showing guys pictures or videos of deer walking under you that 98% of guys doing the same thing that you're doing would shoot in a heartbeat, and they're like, dude, why didn't you shoot that deer? That's a great buck. I'm like, man, that's just not what gets my blood boiling right now. And then, for guys that's what gets their blood boiling, that is completely okay. But I want Hog Johnson. That's it.
Yeah. Okay, man. Chase, unless you've got anything, I've got a closing question for him.
I want him to give us a bold prediction for this year on public.
I like
it. Give us one bold prediction for this season.
Ooh.
Just one.
In South Carolina, on public.
So I'll kind of just go with all right. I'll go with goal / what my goal is, and then what my realistic prediction is. So my goals would be, I want to kill a mature buck in the first 2 weeks of the season. So that would be by the end of September, basically.
Right on.
I want to put an arrow in something. That's if everything goes down the way I want it to go down, that will happen. And basically, I want to get to that point by putting the sweat equity in up front and running enough cameras and doing enough research and on the ground scouting to where I can put myself in that position. I think it's realistic, especially after some of these recent camera pulls, right? And it's always getting a picture is one thing, getting in to kill the deer is a completely different thing. But it's at least self-validating to know I'm putting my cameras in places that good bucks walk by in the daylight. So my hopes are high right now. So prediction is I have at least 2 to 3 encounters with deer that I want to shoot, and I get one on the ground for the season. If I can do that, I'm happy. So yeah, I mean that's my bold. That maybe not a bold prediction, but that's my prediction for how it goes down. I don't have any aspirations of tagging out or shooting 3 or 4 deer with my bow. And I just do it with a bow now. It's the way I prefer to hunt. And obviously that makes things a bit harder. Who knows? Maybe by the end of the season, I'll have had enough and pull out the rifle if enough big deer slip by me. But I'm good with 1 or 2 deer over the course of the season.
All right. So my departing question for you, sir: if you could go back to your earliest public land hunting self and depart yourself one piece of information that would change the way that you attack public land, what would you say?
Stop making a ton of noise and get close.
Why? Break that down. Why?
I cannot tell you the nightmares I have of my former self when I was 21, 22, 20 in college, driving a John boat, 100 yards from where I was going to hunt, cutting the engine, banging my bottom cam on the boat as I was getting out, taking my stand apart when I got to the tree and letting that cable swing around and go bing. You laugh because you've been there.
Yep.
That is and where I was at, I was close to the thick stuff, close enough to where, I guarantee you deer heard me do that. And I did not see deer because they heard me park the boat. They heard me come in. They heard me, set up my climber, bang stuff around. they're so in tune with that, especially in the South, especially on public land, that, I feel like at least the first few years of my hunting journey, like, things would have been radically different if I instantly showed up to the woods one day and I was quiet and I was hunting out of a saddle and I didn't make any noise. And, I wasn't touching every limb as I walked through the woods. Those are things you learn with time. But, I would tell my former self, be quiet, get close to where you think the deer is. Be okay with, bumping one out once in a while. It's okay. Put yourself in the game is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Chase, who does that remind you of?
Who does that remind me of?
Yeah, that said something very similar to that.
It's not myself, is it?
No. It's Andy May, man. He said something very similar. Be more aggressive early
Oh, yeah,
on.
just put yourself in the game.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Right. And that's hard, man. That's really hard. It sounds easy, but, man, I can tell you firsthand, I get anxiety whenever I feel like I'm pushing the limits. I'll be honest with you.
Well, it's a long season, man, and hopefully, and right now you've only been hunting Florida public for 3 years now,
right?
So it's not the end of the world if you go in there and blow up a hunt. You'll be back. You hunt more than just a few times a year, so I don't think you've got to. I don't. That's how I look at it. I'm going to hunt a bunch this season, so inevitably I'm going to mess up, but maybe one of those isn't a mess up, and I get on that big buck.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, great example, learning point for me in that scenario was in Kentucky, walking in these long ridge lines with a headlamp on my head, walking back in, a mile along a ridge top, white headlamp blaring at the sun. What we found is that we weren't seeing deer until like 8:45, 9 in the morning. We weren't seeing like that, gray light movement. And it was like, oh shit. Well, think about it. Like if you're on that ridge and I'm on this ridge, I can look up and see your headlamp, like, a half mile away. Like, oh, maybe the deer are seeing that happen. And, so we just started walking in with like, using real dim red lights and stuff like that. And it's amazing. All of a sudden we start seeing a lot more deer right at first light because the deer down in these hollers were looking up and seeing our headlamps as we walked in every time.
Yeah, we make a lot of boneheaded mistakes when we're young, don't we?
Oh, man.
A lack of attention
absolutely.
to detail by young bucks with full of energy and enthusiasm, but no common sense, probably has saved more deer.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, dude, I appreciate you taking time out your evening. I am excited. One day I'm going to get a chance to meet up with you. I think about 2 years ago you attended a teaching train that I was really hoping to have attended. That was when you went to global with your battle belt mod. And
yeah, it's crazy. I've been wanting to do more of that stuff. I looked down at my at the YouTube video that Scott and I did of that climbing method and of the battle belt mod. And it's like I've got 30,000 views on YouTube with one video, and I was just like, that's weird. Like I never thought 30,000 people would want to see my dumb ass climbing a tree.
Yeah. I feel similarly every time somebody downloads the podcast.
I hear you, man. I completely understand it.
Oh, man. Well, dude, I appreciate you. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find everything Clayton Bahn?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Clayton Bahn, and then Instagram @AddictedWhitetail. Go figure. So yeah, that's where I'm at. And then on YouTube, there's a couple of videos out there that my buddy Scott and I put out. It's Addicted Whitetail. There's one of me climbing a tree with some wild edge steps and a 5-step aider, and then like a what's in my pack video, and maybe more to come this year. Who knows? You may see some of my face on Southern Ground Hunting, or who knows where else. So, man, just love getting out there and getting after it, and trying to balance hunting with everything else in life that's important.
That's it. Well, hang on one second, brother. We're going to close this out, but we want to talk with you afterwards. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. We sit sub 60 days, I think, at this point. I mean, we are dangerously close to deer season. So if you're not out there shooting your bow, if you're not out there getting your saddle system ready, that's okay. There's still time. Get out and do it, and look for all the videos that we've got coming out that'll help you get ready and get into saddle hunting on our YouTube channel. But most importantly, no matter what you do, get outside and enjoy the great outdoors.